Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cintas Center for our big announcement today. I know it's the worst kept secret at this point, but I'm going to give you an outline of the events of the day. First, we're going to hear from our speakers. Then there will be a brief Q&A that the media will be able to ask questions. We'll have wireless mics here for the questions as well. And then we'll do some individual breakouts with a couple of the student athletes and Coach Steele down in the student athlete lounge. Without further ado, it's my honor to introduce our first speaker, Xavier University President, Father Michael Graham.
Thanks so much, Tom, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is thrilling to be here for this special event today. This is not something that we do very often here at Xavier University, but when we do it really, really well. All you got to do is look at the track record over the course of the last 20 years more, kind of coach by coach by coach. And those names, each and every one of them, have become associated with all kinds of signal accomplishments in the history of Xavier University basketball, which has become, of course, a signature element for Xavier University itself. And so to introduce Travis Steele as the next member of that lineage is a really remarkable thing. It's been great to watch him over the course of his association with the program. It was even better in a way to watch throughout the course of this search process. Athletic Director Greg Christopher will speak to that more, I'm sure. But the big difference between now and any time in the past is that we had an unprecedented level of interest in that position from all kinds of coaches all across the country. And the fact that, and looking right in our own backyard at Travis Steele, who in Greg Christopher's memorable words killed his interview on Friday, made the decision all that much more easy. And so really, in a wrap-up, I only have one thing to say. Those of you who go to Xavier basketball games and know what happens in the last couple of minutes will be able to translate. Please welcome Greg Christopher, our athletic director.
Thanks, Father Graham. Before getting on with things, I do want to recognize or say thank you to a few people. One is Father Graham, and I think John Kush is probably in the back, and then the chair of our trustees, Barb Howard, is here somewhere. Certainly appreciate the leadership. You often hear about an organization that's supportive of the basketball program, and I've seen it firsthand for 5 years. But the last 2 weeks, you really live it. The idea that you've got the leadership at the top, giving you enough rope to operate, but still kind of a clean runway, and that's very much appreciated. So thank you very much. Also goes without saying, I'm the one that gets to get up here and introduce Travis, but this was very much a group effort, and I want to recognize the people that were a part of this process as the search committee. Brian Hicks, Susan Lipnicki, Tom Iser, Seth Breitenstein, Jeff Poulard, and then from our trustees, Tim Schroeder here in the front. Again, the way I operate, love to get input, like all kinds of opinions and everything in the mix, and that group of people really made a difference in the process over the last 10 days or so. And finally, I certainly appreciate the kitchen cabinet of sorts we had. Over the last probably 10 days, I've talked to a lot of former players, people in the media that covered college basketball and recruiting, coaches, others. All that input really helped shape our thinking and approach and really fine-tune the characteristics that we were looking for. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the process. I think that's been covered to some degree so far. But Pat, a week ago you asked me if I was excited, right here. Not sure that was the word, but probably the best word, if I would have been a little quicker, we were prepared, and we were absolutely ready for this. You always have a list of candidates. That's clear. But really, the active work on this started in January, the last half of the basketball season. And from Tuesday at 10 o'clock when we found out we were going to be in search mode, all the way up through Friday. Really had a deep dive within our industry, getting that feedback, and then activated the interviews Wednesday night. And again, I've talked a fair amount with that, huddled with Father Graham on Saturday morning and made our decision. There's really two core issues I think that we were in the middle of. First of all was the candidates, and we had a great group of candidates. And Travis was clearly known, because he spent a decade here, and you knew a lot about him. Very detail-oriented, great with relationships. He's responsible a lot for the roster that we've got today, and obviously a really impressive offensive mind. The bottom line, a lot was known about Travis going into this. So actually, Travis, probably the only thing I don't know much about, this was fascinating over the last week. I've read a lot of articles, a lot of you probably did. I don't know how old you are. I saw, I think, about 4 or 5 different ages, somewhere between 33 and 38. So we got a little controversy going on how old Travis is, but again, a lot was known, a lot of positives. The second core issue was really evaluating our direction. Where are we today? Where is this program? Do you believe in where this program is? And do you want to stay the course, or do you want to head out in a new direction? And you have to step back and say, really, look where we are. Big East champions, #1 seed. We were in the Elite Eight last year. The history of this program and what's happened from Independent to MCC to Atlantic 10 to Big East, each coach has taken it a step higher, and you absolutely have to believe in where we are and where we're going. Travis is going to talk a little bit more about this 2% concept he brought up in the interview process, and that really resonated with us. This is a great program. Tremendous history, a lot of respect for those who have come before us. But there is one final hurdle: never being to a Final Four, never winning a national championship. And I was impressed that Travis wasn't afraid to talk about that. He wasn't afraid to shy away from it and understand and talk about his own imprint that he wanted to put on this program. So, Pat, in wrapping up, I am excited now. Absolutely excited about the direction of our program and our new head coach. So with that, let's bring him up here. Our new head coach, Travis Steele.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you to President Father Graham and our Director of Athletics, Greg Christopher, for the belief you guys have in me, for my vision for this program. I also want to say thank you to my wife and my son, Winston, my wife, Amanda. I've got a reputation as a pretty good recruiter. She's the best recruiter I've ever signed. Being a coach's wife isn't always easy. Obviously we travel a lot. We're on the phone constantly. At dinner, I got to take a phone call here and there. So thank you for letting me chase my dream, live my dream of being a head coach at this level. My mom, who's up here as well. My dad wasn't able to make it, obviously. He's in the hospital right now. But thank you for instilling the values you did in me, whether it's discipline, hard work, integrity. I wouldn't be here without that. Mr. Sedler, I saw you walking down. I don't know where you're at. I saw you walking down the steps back there. Thank you guys for your support from the family for our program. It is very, very greatly appreciated. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank my former bosses. Steve Woody at Ben Davis High School gave me an opportunity when I was 18 years old to coach. I was 18. I was coaching guys. He gave me that opportunity, and I'm very, very grateful for it. Thad Mott at Ohio State gave me an opportunity as well, as did Kelvin Sampson at Indiana University, Sean Miller here at Xavier University, and obviously Chris Mack for the last 9 years. Last guy I want to thank, I promise this is the last guy, is my brother John Gross. He's played a huge role in my career. He's guided me through this crazy business that we're in, and he's the head coach at Akron right now. And I'd be remiss without saying thank you to him as well. When I met with Mr. Christopher in San Antonio, I talked about the 2%. Like, where can we go from here? Because obviously we got a great program and a great product here at Xavier University. But before I start to talk about the 2%, I want to talk about that first 98% and what got us here. And what got us here is a lot of people. You know, a lot of people have put their sweat, their tears, their blood, and have sacrificed for this program. And I'm talking about the former players. We've had a lot of terrific ones in the past. I see Joe Sunderman out here. I see Byron Larkin out there as well. We've had terrific players, terrific teams, terrific coaches here. Coaches go from Pete Gillen, Bob Stack, Skip Prosser, Chris Mack, Sean Miller, Thad Mata. We've had a lot of terrific coaches. And I want to say thank you to you guys for getting us to this point. You know, Xavier's about doing both. You know, we've graduated 106 seniors straight in a row. Dates all the way back to 1986. We've also made 12 out of the last 13 NCAA tournaments, which is only 8 teams in the country can say that. I've had an affinity for Xavier basketball that runs long before I ever got here when Sean Miller brought me here 10 years ago. I remember in 1993 when Xavier was playing in the NCAA tournament in Indianapolis. I grew up in Danville, Indiana, which is about 30 minutes west of Indianapolis. And I remember in 93, second round game in the Hoosier Dome, Xavier played Indiana. And growing up, I got to admit, I was a little bit of an Indiana fan, being an Indiana guy. But, you know, Xavier came up on the short side of the things. But the one thing you could always appreciate about Xavier from that game was how tough they were, how hard they played. And you look back on it now and you say, hey, Brian Grant was in that game, Aaron Williams was in that game, Steve Gentry, who's a local high school coach here from the area, was in that game as well. 2003, I sat here in the Cintas Center when my brother, John Gross, was an assistant coach here. And I watched Dave West score 47 points versus that team up I-75 North that we don't like to talk about, that we beat every single time. They decided not to double team him the whole night, and he made them pay. In 2004, I remember being up in Dayton at the Atlantic 10 tournament, watching Xavier play St. Joe's, who was the #1 team in the country, undefeated at the time. Romain Sato, Lionel Chalmers, they beat St. Joe's, and it led them into the NCAA tournament. And I was in Atlanta for the Elite Eight game where there were a few moments and maybe a few questionable calls as well by the officials away from getting to a Final Four. I even coached a former player here at Xavier named Stan Burrell. Stan, I coached him in high school, coached him in AAU, and I'll never forget coming on his visit. He wanted me to come down with him, so I drove him down on an unofficial visit. And Stan, he's a special kind of guy. He really is. He works really hard, but I remember sitting over with Sister Roseanne Fleming in her office over at Alter Hall before it was redone. It looks really nice now. It used to not look nearly as nice. It's almost like we're in the basement. And she promised him that if he came to Xavier University that he was going to get a degree. And I knew right then and there that this was the place for Stan. I knew about all the basketball tradition and success that they had, but the academic piece to me made it a no-brainer for Stan. Then Sean Miller obviously brought me here 10 years ago, and that was during the Atlantic 10 days. And I remember going to Olean, New York, playing St. Bonaventure, Rose Hill Gym, playing Fordham, where I thought we dominated the A-10 with championships both on and off the court. Then we made the transition into the Big East. And, you know, I think which is the premier conference in the country. And I don't even think it's even close. Obviously, Villanova's won two national championships out of the last 3 years. You know, we get to play in Madison Square Garden, which is the greatest arena in the world. The stage is huge. It culminated this past year in us winning a Big East regular season title, getting the #1 seed in the NCAA tournament for the first time in Xavier history. And now it kind of leads into the next 2%, which is what I want to talk about. You know, where do we go from here? How do we get to that 2%? You know, it's like climbing a mountain, and that's what I talked about with Greg, and I feel like that's what Xavier's done for a long time. And we're going upwards. You know, every coach has made Xavier a better place than it was before. And that's my responsibility, and it's a huge responsibility that's on my shoulders. But I think we all have to embrace that, former players included. It's our program. It's the city of Cincinnati, it's former players, it's the alumni. We got to do it together. It's not one game isn't going to define us. It's the holistic approach. We want to graduate players. We want to be about the overall development of our student athletes as far as people, as students and players. We want to do things the right way. That's a non-negotiable. We want to be compliant in everything that we do. We want to graduate our players, and we want to compete for Big East regular season championships, Big East tournament championships, and obviously, and it's the elephant in the room, go where Xavier's never been before in the NCAA tournament. We as a whole have to do it together, hand in hand. We have made Xavier Cintas Center one of the toughest places to play in the entire country, and we have to continue that. Which leads me into the future. Recruiting is the bloodline of our program. It is the bloodline of our program. We have to evaluate student athletes that fit our culture, that value education and value championships. I'm going to use the breadbasket philosophy. What do I mean by that? If I drew a 5-hour radius around the city of Cincinnati, there's good enough talent, there's enough talent within this area to be able to win Big East championships and national championships. Now, I'm not naive enough to sit up here and say, hey, we're only going to recruit within a 5-hour radius. We have good players like Elias Harden from Atlanta. Obviously, Tyreek Jones is from Connecticut. Najee Marshall's from D.C. Q's from, I don't know where in Kentucky, out in the middle of nowhere. But again, we are going to do a breadbasket area, but we're going to try to find the best student athletes we possibly can to make you guys proud. We're going to make the fans and the alumni and the former players proud through how hard we play and how together we play. With all that, I'm extremely honored to be the next head coach at Xavier University and really excited for the future moving forward. Thanks.
At this point, we're going to have a brief Q&A session. If media have questions, if you'd raise your hand, we've got a couple of wireless mics we're passing around, and Coach Steele will take some questions.
Hey, Travis. Are you glad that this moment is now here, kind of the tail end of the chaos of the hiring process and onboarding in the head coaching role, and now you can kind of start to focus on maybe the job itself a little bit more?
You know, Patrick, that's a good question. I had over 1,100 text messages probably within 5 hours after it was announced on Twitter, with Greg and I taking the picture down in the Minger Hotel. But Sean Miller told me, I have really good mentors. I'm very, very grateful for that. He told me to stay focused on the priorities. Get back to those people when you can get back to them, because you can come overwhelmed a little bit with the level of communication. It's about our players. It's about their parents. It's about those guys in the locker room. And secondly, it's recruiting. It never stops. The transfer market's already starting. I'm going to be out recruiting tomorrow because we always have to plan for the future. And then third, I got to hire a really good staff. So those are 3 things that I've really spent my most time on. Honestly, I prepared this speech in about 10, 15 minutes upstairs, just little bullet points. I'm staying focused on what's important.
Travis, what will Xavier look like schematically next year? What kind of personal touches do you want to put on the program that fans will notice on the court?
I do think that fans seem to be coaches as well. They think our defense needs to improve, and I know that over the last few years. I think we could have the best defensive team we've ever had at Xavier. And that's something not to shy away from. We have tremendous athletes, tremendous versatility. We're going to be a man-to-man defensive team primarily. And again, I'm not stubborn enough to say that we're not going to play any zone because I want to win. We'll do whatever we got to do on that end. But I do think we got to be a team that creates offense off of our defense. We lost a lot of skill with Trayvon Blewett, J.P. McCura, Karam Cantor, and Sean O'Mara. And those were, quote-unquote, probably our skill guys, maybe not our best defenders. I hate to break the news to them. But at the same time, I think we got to score off of our defense. So we're going to be a little bit more aggressive defensively. Offensively, we're going to play very similar because Chris let me have a big say in the offense over the last few years.
Travis, when the position first became available, all the players and former staff kind of showed their outpouring towards you. Did you see all that, and what went through your mind when you saw all that?
Honestly, I didn't see it. I stayed off of social media. I just stayed focused on myself. And through this process, I didn't care who the other candidates were. I felt like I was the guy for the job, and I had to be able to relay that message and my vision to Greg.
Coach, obviously Chris Mack has a big impact with the program over the past couple of years. What would you say is the most important lesson you learned from him during his tenure?
I would say, number one, he's a better person than he is a coach. And he's a terrific coach. Very grateful for the opportunity I've had over the last 9 years to work underneath him. I've learned a lot. And so, but I would say one thing, how organized he is, how he organizes his day, how he organizes the year. I guarantee it right now, he has July 2nd already planned out for what he's doing. But he's very organized in everything he does. Practice was the same way. There was never a second that was wasted in practice. We went from one thing to the next. It was very, very detailed. and organized.
Travis, I think you mentioned social media, touched on it briefly. I wonder, what will your social media presence look like? That's such a useful tool for reaching out to recruits, reaching out to the fan base, and if that tact would change for you in any way, what other aspects of this job do you think might require you to change the way you do things a little bit?
Yeah, I told Greg, he asked me in the interview, what was one thing that I'm going to need help with? Probably time management, just to be honest. But I think I've done a decent job to this point over the last 48, 72 hours. But just managing my day, and keeping the priorities straight. Social media, I think, again, I know all our players are on Instagram and all that stuff. I got to be better in that area because, again, that's a huge part of recruiting. It's a huge part of a way to communicate, to sell our program, and obviously get to let fans know who I am and who my family is as well.
Speaking of your family, how much do you think you want to let people in? Chris I told you last week, there's not going to be a lot of me comparing you to Chris in a lot of ways, but he let people into his life in that way. Is that something you'd like to do, or to what degree do you think you'd want to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime being in this business, I think you can't separate your personal life and your professional life. I think you got to be able to combine them. Otherwise, you're going to fail probably at one of them. And we want to be successful, obviously, at both. So they'll be around. Winston will be around at practice a lot, be running around. So will my wife as well. They'll be at a lot of games, and they'll definitely be accessible.
Any other questions?
Thank you, guys.